Hey everyone, it's Alex and Ben. Welcome back to the Oregon Bridge.
We're becoming more populist, right? So we have populist on the left and we have populist on the right. How do we build a country? How do we build a community that allows everyone to be successful? And I want to look at what are the things that bring us together? What are our commonalities? What different perspectives do you bring to the table, right? It's not about what you look like, but what can you bring that no one else has experience in so that we can get the real value, the true value from diversity.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're really excited today to have Jessica Gomez, who is one of the candidates who is running for governor on the Republican side of the aisle. Jessica is the CEO of a semiconductor company based in Southern Oregon. She was born in New York and has experienced homelessness at a very young age as well, which really adds to her unique story, which Ben touches on a little bit in the episode. But Ben, what did you think of the episode?
I thought it was a fascinating conversation. I think Jessica's clearly a very intelligent person who's got experience at the policy level. She was very fluent in talking about policy issues. I think like one of the more impressive guests we've had, particularly the higher ed answer, as we talk about in this episode. I was impressed by what she had to say there. I also think it's going to be tough for her in the Republican primary. As you know, it's very crowded over there. There's some folks who I think are certainly to the right of her in terms of, the way that they talk about their conservatism, but she's got a unique appeal. I think she's unlike any of the other candidates for obvious reasons and not so obvious reasons, both of which I think come up in this episode. But yeah, she's definitely someone that I think is worth listening to and worth learning about. What did you think? What was your takeaway?
Yeah, I think that she had some of the best answers when it came to like in-depth policy discussions of probably any of definitely one of the top tier that we've had on the podcast across the board. She had really good answers that were like, they weren't too into the weeds where you can't understand if you don't get the issue, but like there was actually some meat there. It wasn't just kind of like BS political talking lines. So I was pretty impressed, especially on the answers with higher ed. And then I would say a couple of the downsides of the episode. So I thought I made a very funny joke because Jessica left the Democratic Party as soon as Ben got involved with it. So of course she left because, the radicals like Ben got in, but no one laughed. That was a very unfortunate part of the episode.
Very poor delivery. You need to work on delivery.
2 out of 10. And then it also got nerdy about China at the beginning of the episode. But people should look into the semiconductor issue.
It wasn't about China though. Like, what is your critique? We're going on a quick aside. Maybe Buddy will edit this out. But what is your actual China? What is your actual China critique that you did not make in the episode?
So, it's not even necessarily a China critique. It's a lot of like, there's companies like Intel, which are investing, like building factories and things like that in China when there's like a huge semiconductor shortage right now. And it's like a big national security concern because if we can't make chips, we can't make cars, we can't make high-end electronics. And Oregon is a leader in this industry, as Jessica talked a little bit about into the episode. But maybe we'll just do one episode on that someday. And then we can get into it. So
yeah, we should. Let's get someone from Intel or the Oregon Technology Association or something like that to come on.
Yep. But everyone, thanks again for joining. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and we'll see you in the episode.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks again for tuning into another episode of the Oregon Bridge. We're really excited to have Jessica Gomez with us today. Jessica, how's it going?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. And where we know that your staff had told us that you've been on the campaign trail all over the place. I read a couple news articles and I saw you were doing a tour of Oregon. So where do you find yourself today?
Well, today I'm at home and I'm leaving again tomorrow. And I don't think I'm coming back until like right before Thanksgiving. So that's going to make for a very busy day of food shopping.
Okay. Yeah, that's going to be quite the trek all over the place. So
Yeah.
Hopefully that trip will go well. So the first thing I wanted to start off with is your business experience really interested me. I own my own company. Owning your own company is the worst thing in the world. As you probably know, it's very hard. I read about you and your husband's business story, and I was like, we didn't have to take debt or anything, but I was like, I totally know the position. It's very difficult, but I was particularly interested because you work in the semiconductor industry, and I have actually a couple questions. Surprise is a little bit nerdy, so you have to bear with me.
That's all right.
They're Oregon related too. But can you just tell us a little bit first about like what is your business? What do you do? How did you get into semiconductors? What is a semiconductor business doing in Southern Oregon?
Yeah, so our company is what they refer to as like a pure play foundry, MEMS foundry, which means that we take designs from our customers and then we fabricate those designs into functional chips. Much of the work that we do starts pretty early on in the product development cycle. So some of these designs have never been made before, and it might be brand new technology. So different types of sensors. We make a cancer diagnostics chip for a company in San Diego. We got to actually work on a project with University of San Francisco, and there was a team there that was building a bioartificial kidney. And we got to work on that project. So there's a lot of different types of stuff going on. Our company is like an offshoot, or at least our industry is kind of an offshoot under the semiconductor industry because of the types of materials and the style chips that we make.
Gotcha. That's very interesting. And one thing I wanted to ask in particular, and sorry, you have to be the first one. I've been telling Ben I've wanted to ask a candidate for governor about China for all of our episodes.
Yes,
let's do it. No one will probably know anything about that. But when you said semiconductor, I was like, this is perfect. Yeah. So I think, and a lot of our viewers probably don't know this, but Oregon actually plays a really pivotal role in this because, of course, Intel is headquartered in Oregon. And there is both a lot of shortages in the semiconductor industry right now. I know that's why things like the price of cars is absolutely skyrocketed. Part of which is because cars have a lot of semiconductors in them now.
They're basically a walking computer. I mean, exactly. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting stuff. And one thing, it's a big national security concern that, of course, saw, for example, that companies like Intel are actually investing in semiconductor capacity in China right now and building some of these chips in China, building factories in China and things like that. I just wanted to ask, because you work in this space, is like, does the U.S. still really have a chance in terms of like leading in this issue? And like, how do you think that, you as governor could potentially like empower companies like Intel to help like bring production back to the US, preferably bring it back to Oregon, or like kind of just curious of your general response on that question?
Yeah, I would say it's a pretty tough pivot right now, because in the 90s, we made 37% of all semiconductor devices were, right here in the US. We had all that manufacturing capacity, and pretty quickly that went away. I mean, it was less expensive to manufacture overseas. Sometimes it was easier to manage through the supply chain, and our business is very capital intensive as an industry, and we spend a lot on buildings and equipment. And so we saw a lot of that manufacturing going everywhere else except for the US. And right now we're down to about 12% of US semiconductor manufacturers. So I think the biggest challenge we're going to have in reclaiming some of that capacity is on the workforce side, because we've got really industrious people that know how to design buildings, and we can find locations, and that's just a matter of time and money. But finding the right people to fill those positions is very challenging. In fact, I was talking to another CEO friend of mine last week and asking him, hey, are you having the same issues that we are trying to fill even basic engineering positions? And he was like, it's an absolute nightmare out there. I mean, we've had 4 people that we've made offers to for just one middle management position. All 4 of them were turned down. And we've had that position open for a year. So it's going to be tough, I think, to make that pivot. We absolutely have to do it. And it's a really important industry especially for Oregon. Oregon's really strong in advanced manufacturing and semiconductor manufacturing. And we have a ton of potential in that area, as we see some of these incentive packages coming from the federal government to try to encourage the development or redevelopment of the semiconductor supply chain in the US.
That's really interesting. I do think one of the things we learned from COVID is that we have to dramatically increase our capacity to make things at home, because we're not always going to be able to rely on importing from other countries.
Yeah.
But Titus has taken us deep into policy so quickly.
Yeah.
I want to back up a little bit, because one of the things that I found most fascinating about your story is, and you're pretty open about this, so I hope you're open to talking about this, but you
Sure.
navigated some really challenging circumstances as a kid. On your website, it says that at 9 years old, you sort of served as the role of caregiver for younger siblings. You navigated poverty, you experienced homelessness. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your childhood and what that experience was like, and what it has taught you, or how it's led you to the point that you're at right now.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Gosh, I have some really great childhood memories, but there was a lot of time there that I never really felt like a kid. I had some pretty big responsibilities, and my parents were young. My mom was 18 when she had me, and my dad was really young as well. And they had all four of us pretty much right in a row. And they really struggled financially. They struggled in their relationship. But there was a lot of love in our house, and I think that has been something that we've leaned back on as a family. But much later on. But growing up was hard, and as the oldest in many families, it becomes your responsibility to almost become like that third helping hand as a parent. So when you have a mom that's depressed and laying in bed, it becomes your responsibility to make sure the other little ones are taken care of, and that there's someone holding down the fort. And that was me in that case. And I look back on that time, and I think you could take it either way. Some people, feel bitter about maybe missing out on some things, but I looked at it as a really important part of who I am, and an opportunity to grow as a human being, because not everyone gets to have that responsibility and to feel what that's like. And grow into that. And I did. And there was some really positive things that came of it. In fact, my three other siblings, I have two sisters and a brother, and we're all really, really close for having gone through some of that together.
Well, so my follow-up to that is, I think in some issues, and I think homelessness is one of them, a lot of the people crafting policy solutions are folks who've never directly experienced
Yeah.
the challenge. So I'm wondering what what navigating homelessness taught you that you think you'll bring to the table in terms of the role of policymaker. Like, what insight did you gain from having that lived experience that you want to bring to the table to help craft solutions? Or maybe there's specific solutions you have in mind that are born from that experience.
Yeah, it's being homeless and feeling that constant sense of insecurity. It's almost like at some point you just want to give up on it all, right? Because if you keep trying and keep getting knocked down, that's a really tough place to be. So sometimes it's easy to give up, right? And to just say, this is it, I'm okay with it. And I'm not going to continue to try to dig myself out, because once you're there, it's very, very challenging. The other thing I would say is that there's a whole community out there. It's not that we've got people that are kind of running around on their own. There's good people, there's bad people, there's everybody in between, just like a neighborhood that you live in. When you have these, I would say, like, organizations that come in and say, pick out individual people and say, well, we have a place for you. Are you ready to go? They are leaving something that's really familiar to them. And then, on top of that, I think a lot of what we're working on what we're dealing with right now stems from addiction and mental health. Which just adds a really difficult sort of layer and barrier to the situation. And unless you address those two things, you're not going to get to a place where people are making healthy decisions for themselves, because they are so they're just not in a place where they can really do that. And I've dealt with the mental health piece in my own family as well. And it's so challenging on families. So when we think about what needs to happen from a policy perspective, is that you need to recognize all of that is going to have an impact on how effective those policies are. And if you don't account for those things, you could be really missing an opportunity. So for solutions, I'm looking at how do we create a supportive community where people can do well, and how do we get them to accept help when we know that they won't because they're unhealthy. I'm looking at a 3-tiered system that's kind of modeled after the elderly care model, where you have these community living environments. Tier 1 is maybe like what would be equivalent to memory care or skilled nursing. It's very high touch. It's a closed facility, you can't leave. And then the next level down would be assisted living. Still a lot of high touch, but there's more activities. There's more things that can engage you. And then the next tier down would be your independent living, where you've got a car, maybe you're holding a job still, that kind of thing. So we can do that for people who are struggling with homelessness and addiction and mental health, but do it in reverse and start at that closed facility level and really dig in and get people on the right treatment plans that they can be ultimately successful. Because they're going to fight you on it. I mean, that's just who we are as humans. We don't know that when we're in that space, we just don't know that we need help.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That we're going to come back to behavioral health depending on time later, but
yeah.
I think that was really interesting. So Titus, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, great. So Jessica, I know that I believe you were a registered Democrat, at least up until 2013. And I know that you had also defined yourself as a more moderate candidate in a recent interview. And I have some sort of specific follow-up questions, but just maybe before that, would you kind of just define like your political background in terms of, obviously you were a Democrat at some point and you're, now running for governor as a Republican. Kind of what happened there, like what sort of drove what was kind of the driving force behind the change? And I know Ben started getting involved in Democratic politics around that time. So I think a lot of people left the party around then, right, Ben?
Yeah.
Nobody has ever left the Democratic Party.
I tell you what, being a business owner in Oregon is become increasingly difficult. And that's a big part of what I think drove me to want to get more politically involved, because you just see, you try and you try and try, and at some point it leads you to the state legislature, right? where the policy is being made. But really, I've always been. I look at myself and I and my policies, and I'm very forward thinking. So I don't want to say necessarily moderate, although I think that's a term that some people would use. But I'm always looking forward. What can we do moving forward to build a future for ourselves, and what makes sense, and how do we be practical about policy? It turns out that at some point I wanted to vote in the Democratic primary, and in Oregon we don't have open primaries, so you have to register with a party, and so that's how I ended up registered Democrat. As I got more involved with policy development and was, really looking at the landscape of Oregon and seeing how lopsided we were, and the ideology that was behind a lot of the far left Democrats, I realized it just really doesn't align with me at all anyway. I'm about freedom, opportunity. I'm about giving people the best tools to do their work and creating an environment where they can be successful. And I see that the policies that were being put in place, even though they were really well-intentioned, they actually have the opposite effect in a lot of cases. And so there was just a really philosophical mismatch.
Interesting. And I'm kind of curious because sort of as, from 2013, the Republican Party, I would say the Democratic Party as well, both parties have definitely moved more sort of to the right or to the left, whatever.
Yeah, more polarized.
If you're listening on the podcast, that was a perfect plug in, Ben, for the YouTube videos. Is Ben's making hand motions. So go check us out on YouTube. But, obviously there was 16 candidates, I guess, and then 17 with Donald Trump in 2016. The party decided to go with Trump. A lot of Republican primary voters want to see Donald Trump run for the presidency again, and the person right under Donald Trump, if not Donald Trump Jr., is Ron DeSantis, who is polling at second in the Republican Party. Obviously, the GOP has moved, further to the right as the years have gone on, very strong on pro-life issues, pro-gun and things like that. Kind of just curious if you're do you think that that's a good direction for the party? And do you think if so, is that a good direction for the party in Oregon?
Well, I think what's happening is we're becoming more populist, right? So we have populist on the left and we have populist on the right. And Donald Trump really wasn't a traditional Republican. He was a populist. And I think we started to see, I've thought about this a lot. And I think much of what we're seeing today is a result of how the 2008 recession was handled politically. We had, if you think about the young women and men on the D side that are all about social democrats and that whole movement there, they were just coming into sort of their more adult awareness maybe around that time. They were maybe 12, 13, 15 years old, watching their parents completely lose everything, and no one was held accountable for that. And so the same thing happened really on the right, where you have these big corporations. There was this appearance of a lot of corruption, and there's some really bad things that went on. And again, everyone said, "Well, it's not our fault,"
Yeah.
And there wasn't really there wasn't anybody that went to jail. It was mayhem. I remember right when we started to see the COVID shutdowns, I got this tightness in my chest, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's happening again. This is going to be like 2008. And there's just so much collective anxiety over that. And I think it's really pushed us towards being much more populist, and then pushed us apart. So we have people almost wanting the same or having the same issues, but wanting very, very different solutions. And so it's going to be a challenge bringing people together.
So that's it, because one of the areas where I do think that there's potential for broad alignment across parties, and Alex and I have talked about this, sort of cracking down on major corporations, increasing tax rates for ultra wealthy people, antitrust legislation that sort of breaks up. So where do you fall on those kinds of populist issues? Is there a role for that in the position of Oregon governor to play a role in addressing those sort of larger scale populist Bernie Trump, type issues?
Well, I think that, there's some pretty big challenges with trying to separate out some of the big business issues from what impacts small business, right? And so that's what we typically see. And Oregon is made up. We are built on the backs of small business owners. Most small businesses in Oregon are employing 5 to 20 people, right? That's what our economy is in many cases. And so, we can maybe, many people have gotten on board with this rah, we've got to hold big corporations accountable and all this stuff and tax the rich and whatnot. But what they don't realize is that becomes all businesses, right? And there's very few large employers in Oregon. And when you put policies in place like that, it becomes really disruptive and can prevent us from being globally competitive, which is what we really need to be able to do now, right? We have this opportunity to bring some of the supply chain home. We have a really great opportunity to get more invested in the core advanced manufacturing in Oregon. We have some amazing craft food, wine. We have all of these really incredible opportunities. And if we get too wrapped up into punishing, right, we don't get the opportunity to be competitive.
So we'll come back to policy in just a moment, but one more identity question. I think there might be some minor, I know there's a ton of people running for governor on both sides, but of the sort of major contenders that tend to get ink in newspapers, Titus and I think you're the only person of color running, at least on a high profile level on either side, either Democrat or Republican. And so candidates of both parties who are white have weighed in a lot on the issue of racial justice and how they would bring that lens to policymaking, or not bring that lens in the case of some candidates that we've spoken to. But I'm curious what and it sounds like from your biography that we read that your identity, as, I don't know if you use the term Latina or Hispanic, but that's like important part of your story and who you are.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about how that identity would impact policymaking and just your thoughts on racial justice generally. Obviously, that's a huge conversation right now in Oregon.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm a Puerto Rican descent. I mean, on both sides of my family. So I grew up eating Puerto Rican food, rice and beans almost every day. The language was really important in our family, although I don't speak Spanish. And it was culturally, it was just, I didn't really know that we were different as kids. And so
because you were with a community of community of color.
Yeah, we were just, that was our family. And we were, I would say, somewhat, I was somewhat sheltered from experiencing tons of other cultures until I kind of moved and went to school and all of that, right?
Interesting.
So that was a different experience, to come to Oregon, where people, first of all, I was from New York, so people have noticed an accent and knew I was different, and they looked a little different too. So I think that my political background and my ethnicity is, and how I approach certain things can be pretty confusing for people, because they're like, wait a minute, you don't fit the mold, right? You're not aligning right. Why are you doing that? Why are you a Republican, Jessica
you're
Gomez?
To be a Democrat.
You're not supposed to be there. So when I ran in this for the state Senate, identity politics really played a big role, right? Where I experienced racism from my own party's side. There was comments on Facebook, vote for Gomez and you'll have tacos on every corner. And I'm like, no, bananas.
Oh my God.
I mean, there is that element of it, right? But I think there's a lot of people that are also looking at, how do we build a country? How do we build a community that allows everyone to be successful? And I'm a true believer in, the teachings of Martin Luther King, and that we should judge people on the content of their character. And when we see this sort of overemphasized, like we're building policy that is emphasizing race and ethnicity, I really question how healthy that is. And that doesn't align with me or what I was taught as a kid. And I just think that we're focusing on the wrong thing. I mean, we have some people that are really struggling economically, and it doesn't matter if you're white, Chinese, Hispanic, Black, if you're living in that neighborhood, you're at a disadvantage. And so we should be looking at ways to make sure that we are providing opportunities for everyone. We're making our entire system better and easier to navigate. And I think the trap that Oregon has gotten into is that we're going to fix a problem for this very specific population of people. And we're going to leave everything else the same. And that doesn't work.
So that is really interesting, because I definitely don't disagree about we need to provide opportunity for everyone. But I think the argument from the left would be, when we create policies that are designed to create opportunity for everyone, what we see is that oftentimes the people who benefit from those policies tend to be white, and that you can actually use race as a predictor for outcomes across society, whether it be healthcare, education, income, et cetera. And so I think one of the reasons why the left has moved to be a lot more racially conscious in policymaking is this sense that if we're not racially conscious, if we don't bring a racial justice lens to policymaking, then the outcomes, because of systemic racism, will tend to favor folks who are white, just because of the way that the system was built. Do you think there's any validity to that, or how would you parse that?
Well, I think So gosh, I think that the problem with tackling things in that way is that we are sending the signal to people that they are victims, right?
Mm.
And when you already feel like a victim, that means that you don't feel like that you'll ever be successful, that you'll ever have that opportunity. And so one of the great things for me growing up is I didn't know any better, right? No one ever told me I couldn't. Nobody, yeah, maybe I was different, but it was never, I never made the connection of being different and having less, or being different and struggling more, right? And I think that if I had, it's almost like it could be self-limiting for people, and to take little kids and start teaching them some of the elements of critical race theory, which is you come from this background, you have blonde hair, blue eyes, you're fair skin, and therefore you have more opportunity than someone who maybe looks like Jessica Gomez, right? The kids who look like me say, well, I guess that's it for me. I'm I'm a goner. And it really it I think it could limit their potential to really strive and do well. And yeah, maybe it is harder work, but it's certainly not impossible. And if we don't make the effort, then we'll never get there.
I think Titus is going to take us to critical race theory here in just a moment. But I think it's interesting what you're saying, because you're not necessarily disagreeing with the premise, which is like, there are some advantages in our society to being white. I think that, like, or maybe you are, but that, to me, I think that part is pretty much apparent.
It's not white, it's sameness. It's sameness, right? If you go to any other country, right, and you go and you experience, I mean, go to Shanghai. Like, I stick out like a sore thumb, and so will you. You'll be a foot taller than most people.
But even from friends of mine who've done business in China, being white has its own advantages in the Chinese economic culture.
Sort of.
But
I mean, it's a matter of perspective, I think.
So I do think it, like, I am fascinated by this conversation, because I agree. A student that I mentor, his name is Abdi, who now goes to Howard University and is doing incredibly well academically. He's African American. We've talked about this sense of, like, it is really important for young people to have a sense of empowerment and not a sense of being a victim, or being, or not even, whether you call it being a victim or being incapable of overcoming obstacles. But the flip side is, we should also be truthful and accurate in what we're teaching our kids and how we're teaching our kids. And I don't think, like, I don't hear people on the left very frequently saying we actually need to bring critical race theory to K-12. I don't think that would be an appropriate
But they're
thing.
doing it. They are. I mean, if you listen to parents, I mean, parents have been homeschooling their kids now for a while.
But how is
starting to see?
How do you see critical race theory show up in K-12? Like, I'm on a school board and I don't see. I mean, Reagan.
It's not everywhere, right? But it is becoming part of the conversation, and I think parents are questioning, like, okay, how healthy is, and I can tell you. So I sit on a number of boards and commissions. And they're using now, they're collecting what they're calling real D data, or real data, right? They're collecting information about people who are applying for boards and commissions based on, what their sexual orientation is, how they identify, what their cultural background is. And that is become so much of the emphasis now, that the core competency is now looked at almost secondary, or at least that's what is now being, that is what the emphasis appears to be, right? And so when you are separating people in bins like that, I don't know how healthy that really is. I want to look at, what are the things that bring us together? What are our commonalities? What different perspectives do you bring to the table, right? It's not about what you look like, but what can you bring that no one else has experience in, so that we can get the real value, the true value from diversity, not just saying that we do on a piece of paper and making board appointments based on, whether you're Hispanic or not.
I think there's definitely something to that, but I think the problem is if we're racially blind, as in we don't take into account race or sexual orientation or other identities, then I think that leads us to a system like we have where, like, if you look at the legislature, if you look at local government, if you look at state boards and commissions, in most cases, it's not actually representative of the people that we're supposed to be serving. So I think you're right. It shouldn't just be quotas. I don't think are the answer if it's just like, check boxes, but I do think there has to be some way.
I'm not saying don't have any emphasis on equity or inclusion or diversity. I mean, those things are important, right? But when we make it such a huge part of the conversation, you're missing out on a lot of things that are also important. For example, I don't want to be invited to sit on the board of a public company because of my cultural background. That's not the reason. I want to be invited because I'm the best qualified person. I'm smart, I'm educated, I understand the company, I understand the goals, and people want to work with me, right? Nobody wants to be a token board member. That doesn't feel good.
I have said the exact same. I'm running for the state house right now in House District 25. And I literally just like last week said, I don't want people to vote for me because I'm the gay candidate. Like that has never been appealing to me, to have like the vote for me because it's like vote for me because I work really hard and I understand these things and I want to do a good job and these are my platforms.
And I'm going to kick ass and do all this cool stuff. Like, who cares about that other thing?
Totally.
But, and I think a lot of people feel like that.
But I also think, and you probably would agree with this, I also think my experiences as a gay person will be valuable for me in that role. Just like the perspective you have as a Latina is like, we actually should have representation from people who have different lived experiences, and that will make
absolutely
the delivery. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Again, there is such an incredible value of bringing people together of different walks of life, different backgrounds, from different regions. I mean, it is really important.
So now that
we beat that one up pretty good.
I was going to say, now that we've built some common ground, we've built some common ground here. Titus, why don't you tear it all down with an education policy question?
So I have one more question related to critical race theory. Then I'll actually pivot a little bit more into policy based on your background. But I mean, and Ben and I have written about this in the Liftoff a bunch, is that, school boards and high schools and middle schools, et cetera, have really become like the culture war flashpoint. And I'm by no means an expert on school boards and anything like that, but it seems like at least these sorts of things are getting a lot of attention. And I mean, they're causing a lot of backlash from parents in particular. I mean, we just saw what happened in Virginia with Youngkin. The New Jersey's governor race was very close. They were running on some similar issues, not exactly the same, but just to kind of cap off the CRT issue, if you were governor, is that something that you would push back on in terms of education policy, or like, how would you deal with that?
Well, I think we need, if we don't like critical race theory and teaching it, let's say in school, or I would say, some people call it indoctrination, right? If we don't want that in school, we've got to provide an alternative. And you can't just say, no, we're not going to teach anybody about, the racism. We're not going to teach anybody about, how our laws and how our policies have changed to provide, better environments so everybody can grow and thrive together. Like there was some real changes that have been made and still work to go to make sure that the playing field is fair. But I think, again, we need to provide that alternative. And I'm looking at an organization, it's called FAIR. It's Foundation Against Racism and Intolerance. And there's some really great people from all walks of life on there, all different cultures. And they're putting together, here's some information that will be helpful in helping to guide those conversations about racism and intolerance from an educational perspective. Here is some recommendations for reading and things like that to help people have those conversations. And I think we need to remain open. We need to remain, I think closing ourselves off because we don't like critical race theory doesn't mean we get an out and we don't get to, we don't have to discuss racism or teach about it in school.
So one quick thing, Titus, before we move, I'm curious how this, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the situation in Newburgh, but it's been blowing up recently. And it seems like Titus and I joke about how there's all these like small local issues that have become national news stories in Oregon over the last couple of years. And Newburgh is a great example.
Literally no one in the country knows where Newburgh, Oregon is.
I was just there.
Literally no one.
So, but for our listeners who aren't following, 4-3 conservative majority won in the last election. They have done a few things, but the most salient, I think, is they passed a policy prohibiting pride flags and Black Lives Matter symbols and flags to be displayed by staff on school grounds, in classrooms, etc. The fallout from this has actually been, I think, far worse than just that policy. In fact, there's a lawsuit by the Newburgh Education Association that says, I still can't believe people aren't taught. This is like mind blowing to me. It gets me so upset. But a middle school principal told their staff at a staff meeting, I don't want you to tell your students that it's okay to be gay or it's okay to be trans. If you have a problem with that, come talk to me. Which is obviously like trickle down from this policy that's about symbols, but it's becoming part of the culture from the staff about basically like, do not affirm a student who is LGBT. And I think it's also created some hostility among students. Like there's reports of like a student who was joking about slave trade and using like racial slurs on social media. There's a teacher who showed up in blackface to school. Not a teacher, excuse me, a classified employee who showed up in blackface. So I'm curious on like taking critical race theory out of it, because that's not actually about critical race theory, but it is about race. It is about school boards and education policy. Do you have any thoughts on what should be done about that situation? Or do you think, local control, they're allowed to do what they want to do?
Well, I think I believe in there are some decisions that really should be made locally, but I also believe in love and understanding, and that we've got to find a way to work through this. And we've become, again, so polarized that everything is politicized. Racism should not be politicized in that way. It's not a political issue. It's a human issue about all of us. And we have to find a way to accept each other, to support each other, to be more loving, to be more understanding that we are all human beings. I don't care if you've got purple, green hair. I don't care if you've got missing 5 toes. I mean, none of that stuff really matters. At the end of the day, for me, I want an environment where everyone can be themselves, everyone can be happy, and they can be prosperous, support their families. Those are the things that really matter, is that we are not engaging in this kind of conversation that becomes so heated that we stop seeing the human beings behind what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I before Ben stole my thunder there, I was going to talk about education, but actually higher education.
Yeah.
So I want to. And Ben has been getting many texts from me over this issue. He doesn't respond to many of them.
Because they're annoying, but yeah, go ahead.
There has been, and maybe you've seen some of these in the Wall Street Journal. They have like put this female reporter, I forgot her name, but she has just been dropping bombs after bombs on what I would say is the higher education industrial complex. And what many of these articles show, and they're actually a lot of the times impacting minority students too. And like these articles like actually make me sick to my stomach, is these top tier institutions, they market to, kids saying, you need to get this master's in social work, you need to get this master's in theater, whatever. They spend, ungodly amounts of money taking out unlimited graduate loans, which to me is just absurd that that's even something that you can do. And they get they come with $250,000, $300K of debt out of college, and they make $40,000. And I went to the University of Oregon, and I'll give an example. I'm looking this up right now, but it looks like that it says Oregon law students, when they graduate and move into the public sector, make about $52,000 a year.
Law school
coming out
students?
of school.
Law
yes,
schools?
law school students. Yes. So I'm just sort of curious because I also know you run a successful business. You did not attend a four-year university. You only got a associate's degree from a community college. Like, from your perspective, because I think that the governor does have a lot of sway over this. It's like what would you do to reform the higher education industry? Like, to me, it is honestly shocking that no one has gone to prison over this. Like, they are clearly marketing this is clearly a for-profit industry, even with these public institutions. Like, they are telling people these degrees are worth it, they're going to get great jobs, and like that's clearly just not happening. Like, where do we begin to sort of reform that, and like what do you think that reform looks like? Because obviously you were able to get a 2-year degree. I'm sure it wasn't as expensive as going to a 4-year or also 2-year master's program. You're able to be successful, and I have a lot of employees who didn't graduate from college, and they're making more than a lot of most college graduates because we taught them on the job skills. How do you kind of look at that issue, and like, what are the kind of the main points that you see for that?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. College is way too expensive now. Part of what happened. So I sit on I'm the board chair for Oregon Tech, which is Oregon's only polytechnic university, and that means that we have our training is very hands-on. And what we've seen is over a couple of decades, states have divested from from our public higher education system, meaning we used to support universities at about 78% state funding, and now we're about 40% of the total budget. And so when that happens, the way that colleges and universities, public universities, and I don't know too much about the privates and how they handle their finances. I know the public system pretty well, but what ends up happening is that you end up having to raise tuition year after year after year to make up for that lack of funding. There's also a lot of constraints on how you manage your funds. And so, we have and those public universities have a very, very large payroll is the largest expenditure. You don't really get to negotiate your own health insurance. You don't get to negotiate your own benefits package. There's some things that you're just sort of stuck with based on being part of a public university system. You have to pay a lot for maintenance and some of these other things. So it becomes very tricky to try to find ways to close that gap without raising tuition. And what ends up happening is every year we go to the legislature and we beg for adequate funding so that we can continue to keep tuition low. On top of all that, you have new legislation that happens every time we have a session that inherently raises the cost of operations because you're having to sort of comply, you're having to do more, you're having to prove that you're in compliance of whatever new policy that's in place. So that's why we see a lot of this where tuition has just kind of gone up like crazy. The other, so I think the question is, what do we do about it? I'm a big believer in hands-on training. I think we need to better prepare students starting in high school. So I want to put in place a statewide apprenticeship model starting in the 11th grade. So basically what would happen is you want to be an apprentice, you select a career track, you get connected up with a local employer, you go to work a quarter of the time while you're in school. Your senior year, you're working half the time, you're still getting academic credit, but now you're engaged and you're making money, right? And you're building those skills that everybody needs in order to go to work. You're also learning about your career track. You might even get college credit. So that's one way to actually give people more exposure as they're going through this exploration about what do I really want to study in school. The other thing that I really want to make sure that we can get done is a universal credit program for college. So I hear it all the time where you've got a student that has maybe done some self-exploration, taken a bunch of classes. They decide all of a sudden, okay, I want to go to this particular college and I want my credits to transfer, and they end up, a lot of transfer credits don't make it over to their new degree. So that means that they're leaving so much of that investment in time and money on the table. So I want to make sure that every college credit that somebody has is fully transferable within that public system. So any community college or any public university, so that we're at least, we're not losing what we've already invested in.
I love that idea. Just quick interjection.
Yeah.
That is like, there's a bunch of students who graduate from high school, enroll in a community college. They say, oh, sorry, your credits don't transfer. They have to take the class there. Then they transfer to a four-year school. The four-year school says, oh, your credits don't transfer here. They have to take it again. Like, I mean, that's
ridiculous.
But it is, universal credits is a great idea.
And we don't have systems that are aligned with each other well enough to do that. But there's a lot of work that's going into doing that now, and Oregon can do it. We just got to get on the ball with that. I think that universities and public universities interstate need to be better integrated with our economic development strategy and goals. This is something that California has done and did early very, very well. I'm talking 30, 40, 50 years ago. They integrated public universities into their economic development strategy, especially around technology. And even though California has made a lot of mistakes, they have an economy that can withstand a lot of that because they've got this, regenerative engine that is coming out of their public university system for innovation and technology development and research that we never fully developed in this state. And so that also, I think, will bring more dollars to higher ed and have a really big impact on our economy. And hopefully, give people the opportunity that they need in order to be educated and make more money. And then the other thing is, in general, 150 years ago, education was about not going to work. It was about being able to go to a dinner party and hold an educated conversation, right? And we're now, and the trade that you were learning at home with your family. You were a farmer, you did metalworking, or whatever. You were in manufacturing. We used to make things here, and slowly but surely we've kind of moved away from that. And so we still have a lot of emphasis on liberal arts in this country, and which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think people misunderstand that as a career track. It is a very amorphous career track, right? And so we can do a much better job at making sure that we're doing that counseling up front and making sure that people have some experience to go on, like, yeah, I'm going to get a psychology degree because I know I'm going to become, I'm going to have my own practice, right? That can be a real track. But if you go get a psychology degree and just because, you're interested in it, and, then you're in debt 60 grand and you're working at Starbucks, that doesn't work out so well. So I think there's more that we can do to align skills, align interest, but we've got to start earlier, and we have to start with our little kids and exposing them to what is out there in the world.
Thank you for that. That's fascinating issue. So
I'm gonna say that was probably the best higher ed defined platform we've had on this podcast.
For sure.
So,
Yeah.
Good on you and your staff to clearly have the ideas down.
Yeah.
Well, she cheated. She's on the board of a higher ed institution. So we got
True. It doesn't even count. She cheated.
So our final question here is we'll shift to politics real quickly. So in the GOP primary, you've got Dr. Bud Pierce, who's been the nominee before, got a lot of name recognition. You've got Stan Pulliam, who's the mayor of Sandy, who's tapped into this sort of anti-COVID sentiment on the right. You've got Bridget Barton, who's raising a bunch of money, knows the political scene really well. Can you give us the political case? Make a case about why you can win this primary and win the general election, why you think you're the candidate who can pull it off despite those advantages that other candidates have. What's your plan for winning this primary and then the general?
Yeah, so my team has cautioned me not to give away their strategies.
Fair. You don't have to give us the playbook.
But I think we talked a lot about identity politics in this podcast, and I think reality is your profile matters. and people are looking for something different. They're looking for someone who aligns better with their own lived experience, and I really bring that to the table in a meaningful way. We also have to have someone that's got practical business experience. And I look at the candidates that we have, and I'm the only CEO of a from the ground up, manufacturing company that is currently, working through some of the challenges that we have here in Oregon. And that's, we've got to have somebody that understands the impact of the policies that they're putting in place. And so, we've got to communicate that. We've got to communicate it often. We've got to raise a lot of money. Politics is expensive, but I think we've got a really good shot at this. And the other point is we've got to have somebody that can make it through a general election. And we've got more unaffiliated and independent voters than either party holds, but we're at a disadvantage on the R side. And I believe that we have to have candidates that are exciting, that are future focused, that are going to really send the message that, hey, we're not here. I'm going to be governor of this entire state, right? Including our rural parts, including Portland Metro. And we have to have somebody that can bring everyone together and align them around a common vision for our state. Where are we going in the future? What does the future in Oregon look like in 10 years? What are we doing for our kids so that we can have a thriving state? And so far, I haven't really seen people articulating a clear vision for us. And I think that's going to be a competitive advantage.
All right. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Before we let you go, and this will really show how well your staff helped you in terms of prep, where do people go to find you? Where do they go to follow you on Twitter? Where do they find you on Facebook or social media or whatever? If folks want to, volunteer for your campaign, donate, learn more about you, where should they go?
Yeah, you can go to the website. It's jessicagomezforgovernor.com, actually .org. See, very unprepared, aren't I?
Well, at least you're not.
You remembered.
Actually, you can just Google me and there's like 5-10 pages that pops up and you can go in and check it out. We've got, we're starting to do more articles. There's more policy up on that site. You can connect to Facebook, Twitter, all of those social media outlets, and there's a place to donate as well.
Great. Well, Jessica, thank you again so much for joining us. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Please make sure to subscribe. Go check us out on YouTube, and if your platform allows, please give us 5 stars because we love when you do that. So we'll see you in the next one, and thanks again, Jessica.
Thank you. Bye.